Welcome to Hope Stories. Imagine walking down a deserted alley and seeing a child digging through garbage, clutching a faded photograph like it was the last piece of their soul. Now imagine realizing that child might be the one person you've spent your whole life running from, and the only person who could save you from yourself. This is not just a story about wealth, power, or betrayal. It's about the weight of secrets, the cost of silence, and the fragile bond between a father and a daughter who were never meant to meet. What happens when love arrives too late, and when the truth finally surfaces? Will it heal or destroy everything left behind? Stay with us, because what unfolds will test every idea you've ever had about family, forgiveness, and destiny. Now, let's step into the beginning of this unforgettable journey. The winter wind slashed through the broken alleys of Detroit's abandoned industrial quarter, rattling rusted fences and carrying with it the stench of oil and despair. Richard Miller pulled his coat tighter, his polished shoes out of place on cracked asphalt littered with shattered glass. He shouldn't have been there. An investor of his stature had no business wandering this forgotten ruin. But something had drawn him, a restless voice whispering that the past was waiting among the ghosts. That was when he saw her. A small figure crouched by a dumpster, digging through black plastic bags with hands too thin, too pale. Her hair, a tangled mass of gold, fell across her face, hiding her from the world like a curtain of shame. But when she looked up, startled by his footsteps, Richard felt the air leave his lungs. The girl's eyes were piercing blue, hauntingly familiar, filled with hunger, fear, and something else, something that reached across 8 years and stabbed him straight in the heart. "Are you lost?" His voice cracked, betraying a nervous tremor he hadn't known in decades of boardrooms and negotiations. "I'm not lost," the girl whispered. "I'm just looking for her." She pulled from her coat pocket a crumpled photograph, its edges worn, the colors fading. Richard's chest tightened when he glimpsed the smiling face of a woman he had tried and failed to bury in memory. Christina Adams. The name struck like a blade, slicing open an old wound. For a moment the world tilted. The sounds of the city faded until there was only the pounding of his heart and the whisper of Christina's voice from long ago, pleading for him to listen, to trust, to stay. He had walked away then, consumed by ambition, too afraid to be shackled by responsibility. Now here stood the proof of his cowardice, fragile, shivering, searching for scraps in the dark. The girl clutched the photograph to her chest. She used to tell me stories at night about someone I would meet one day, someone who would make everything better. Her eyes, shimmering with tears, rose to meet his. Do you think that person ever really existed? Richard felt something collapse inside him. He wanted to speak, to deny, to explain, but the words stuck. His polished mask cracked. He saw not a stranger's child, but his own blood, a daughter he had never met, whose mother had carried the burden alone. 8 years of board meetings, contracts, and hollow victories flashed before him, suddenly meaningless in the face of this single truth. "I knew her," he finally forced out, his voice hoarse. "I knew your mother." The girl's lips parted in surprise, trembling. "You did?" "Yes." Richard's eyes burned as the confession clawed its way out. "And if what I'm thinking is true, then I know you too, Lauren." The name left his lips like a revelation, and her body went rigid. She took a step back, clutching the photograph as if it were a shield. "How do you know my name?" Richard's heart pounded like a war drum. He wanted to tell her everything, about the summer nights with Christina in Boston, about the argument that shattered them, about the letter he never answered, the call he ignored. He wanted to beg forgiveness. But what right did he have to say he was her father now, after all this time? Lauren's voice broke through his torment. "She said he was out there somewhere, that he loved us once." Her words were trembling, uncertain, but there was a flicker of hope buried beneath the fear. "She never told me his name." Richard's throat constricted. 8 years of silence hung heavy between them, and he knew the next words from his mouth would shatter the fragile barrier between past and present. He opened his lips, the truth rising like a tide. Then a siren wailed in the distance, flashing blue and red lights splintering across the walls. Lauren gasped and pressed herself against the dumpster, eyes wide with terror. Richard reached instinctively to reassure her, but she flinched from his touch. "What are you so afraid of?" he asked, bewildered. Her response came in a whisper so raw it made his blood run cold. They said if anyone found out who I really was, they'd take me away again. The weight of her words crushed him. Who were they? Why would anyone want to keep her hidden? And most of all, how much had Christina suffered alone before her death, carrying this secret while he lived in gilded emptiness? The siren faded, leaving silence thick enough to choke. Richard stared at the girl, his daughter, though she didn't yet know, and felt his world tilt off its axis. For the first time in his life, money, power, reputation meant nothing. Only the truth mattered now. Only her. He took a step closer, steadying his voice even as his insides trembled. "Lauren," he said, "you are not alone anymore. And whoever told you those lies, they can't keep us apart." She stared at him, lips trembling, the photograph clutched between her fingers. And then, in a voice that pierced the night, she asked the question that would change everything. "Are you the man my mother was waiting for?" Richard froze, the weight of destiny crashing down on him. This was the moment. The choice he had once run from now stood before him in flesh and blood, demanding an answer he could no longer escape. Would you forgive a father who abandoned his child if he returned years later, broken with regret? What would you risk to finally claim the family you never knew you had? And as Richard opened his mouth to speak the truth, the shadow of another secret stirred in the darkness, one that could destroy everything before it even began. Richard's throat burned as though he had swallowed fire, his lungs tight with the weight of the question hanging in the cold night air. Lauren's eyes, Christina's eyes, searched his face with a desperation so fierce it shattered his carefully guarded composure. He wanted to say yes, wanted to scream it into the darkness, to claim the place he should never have abandoned. But the truth was a double-edged blade, and the moment he wielded it, there would be no turning back. He reached out a trembling hand, but before his words could surface, a shadow moved at the end of the alley. A tall figure lingered under the dim streetlight, watching. Richard stiffened. For a fleeting second, the man's outline seemed familiar, though distorted by the haze of memory. Lauren noticed too, her body tensed, and the faint spark of hope in her expression dimmed into fear. "It's them," she whispered, retreating closer to the dumpster, clutching the photograph as if it were a lifeline. Richard's pulse spiked. Them. Whoever had kept her hidden, whoever had poisoned her with lies, were they still circling her like vultures? He forced his voice steady. "Who is he, Lauren? What do you mean?" She shook her head violently. "I can't say. They'll take me away again if I tell. They always said I wasn't allowed to belong to anyone." The figure melted back into the night before Richard could move, leaving him with more questions than answers. Guilt surged like a storm tide. What kind of life had Christina endured, raising their daughter under the shadow of some unknown threat? And what kind of man had he been, so blind to it all, while basking in boardroom victories and hollow accolades? His mind clawed at fragments of the past, arguments with Christina, her voice shaking as she begged him to listen, the envelope of letters he never opened. What if the warnings had been there all along, discarded in his arrogance? Lauren's voice broke his spiral. "Why didn't you come for us?" The question was a blade driven straight through his chest. She had not asked if he was her father. She had asked why he had failed. He sank to one knee in front of her, his expensive coat brushing against the dirt of the alley, as though kneeling in penance. "I was a coward," he confessed, the words tasting of ash. "I chose ambition over love. I told myself I wasn't ready, that I couldn't carry the weight. And while I ran from responsibility, your mother carried it all, alone. I can't undo what I did, Lauren, but I will not run again." Tears shimmered in her eyes, yet distrust still anchored her small frame. "Words don't make you my father. Promises don't bring her back." The honesty in her voice cut him deeper than any accusation. He had built empires, but here in this alley stood the one person whose forgiveness mattered, and it was not his to demand. The wind howled through the broken glass windows above, and with it came a memory Richard had tried to bury. Christina's last voicemail, unheard for years, still saved on his phone like a ghost trapped in a machine. His hand shook as he pulled out the device, unlocked it, and scrolled until he found the message he had always avoided. "Do you want to hear her voice?" he asked softly, Lauren froze, her breath catching. You still have it? He nodded. I never had the courage to listen, but maybe it wasn't meant for me alone. Maybe it was meant for us. He pressed play. Christina's voice spilled into the night, warm yet cracked with fatigue. Richard, I don't know if you'll ever hear this. By the time you do, maybe it's too late. But if you're listening, I want you to know she exists, our daughter. She has your eyes. She deserves better than I can give her alone. Please, don't let her grow up thinking she isn't wanted. The message ended in static, a ghostly silence that crushed Richard's chest. Lauren's hands shook as she clutched the photograph tighter, her lips trembling. She never told me she asked you for help. Richard could not breathe. He had been given the chance, and he had thrown it away. Now the price stood before him in flesh and blood, asking for nothing more than belonging. His voice cracked under the weight of shame. I failed her. I failed you. But if you let me, I will spend the rest of my life proving that you are wanted more than anything I've ever wanted. For the first time, Lauren's guarded walls flickered. She took a hesitant step toward him, then another. But just as the fragile thread between them began to hold, headlights flared at the mouth of the alley. A black SUV rolled to a stop, its engine humming with menace. Two men stepped out, dressed in suits too sharp for these ruins, their faces obscured by shadows. One called out, his voice smooth and chilling. Lauren, it's time to come with us. Richard surged to his feet, instincts roaring. Whoever these men were, they knew her name, and that meant the danger Christina had tried to warn him about was real. He moved to shield her, his body a barrier between her trembling frame and the predators at the alley's edge. His voice dropped to a growl. She's not going anywhere. What would you do if the child you just discovered was your own, was suddenly threatened by forces you don't understand? And as the strangers advanced, Richard realized this reunion was only the beginning of a battle that could cost him everything, including the daughter he had only just found. The two men stepped closer, their polished shoes crunching on broken glass, their movements deliberate and rehearsed. Richard felt Lauren's small hand tighten around his coat, her fingers trembling but unwilling to let go. Every instinct in him screamed to run, to grab her and disappear into the night. But another voice whispered that running would only confirm what these men already believed, that she was something valuable, something they would not stop chasing. The taller of the two tilted his head, his smile sharp and practiced. Mr. Miller, we know who you are. We know what she is. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The girl belongs to us. Richard's jaw locked, the words cutting deeper than he expected. Belongs. As if Lauren were an object, a possession, not a living child. The anger rising in him was like nothing he had ever felt in the sterile boardrooms of his empire. This wasn't a negotiation over numbers. This was a war for his daughter's very existence. He stepped forward, his voice low but firm. She's my daughter. She doesn't belong to anyone but herself. The shorter man chuckled darkly. Funny, her mother used to say the same thing, and look where she ended up. The words struck Richard like a gunshot. His pulse pounded, questions colliding in his head. Christina, what did they mean? Had her death not been the tragic accident he had always imagined? Had she been silenced, kept from reaching him, by these same shadows now standing before him? He glanced at Lauren, who stared wide-eyed, lips pressed tight, as if she already knew pieces of this nightmare he had yet to uncover. The taller man took another step forward. You think you're protecting her, Richard, but the truth is, you've just put her in more danger than ever. Christina tried to keep her hidden, and for 8 years she succeeded. Do you really think you can succeed where she failed? Richard's stomach twisted. It wasn't just his guilt anymore. It was the crushing realization that his reappearance might have exposed Lauren to threats she had once been shielded from. By pulling her into his world, had he condemned her? The SUV's engine idled like a predator's growl, the night closing in with suffocating inevitability. Richard's mind raced. He had power, influence, connections in every corner of the country, but none of it meant anything here, in this alley, with two strangers holding the key to a secret that could unravel everything he thought he knew about Christina's life and death. Why her? He demanded, his voice breaking. Why have you been circling my daughter all these years? What do you want from her? The shorter man smirked, leaning just enough for the light to catch the scar tracing his jaw. The same thing Christina tried to keep from us. She wasn't just protecting a child, Miller. She was protecting a legacy, and that legacy is standing right behind you. Richard turned slightly, his eyes meeting Lauren's. She shook her head, confusion and fear colliding in her gaze. "Dad," she whispered, the word trembling, fragile, but carrying the weight of belief. For the first time, she had chosen to call him that without hesitation. And that single word became his anchor, his compass. He would not fail her again. He reached back, taking her hand, feeling the pulse of her trust beat against his palm. "You'll have to go through me," he told the men, every syllable carved from steel. For a moment, silence fell, the kind that precedes either blood or revelation. Then the taller man sighed, as though disappointed in a stubborn student. "So be it, but don't say we didn't warn you. The truth has teeth, Richard, and once it bites, there's no letting go." They stepped back toward the SUV, retreating, but their eyes lingered, promising this was far from over. When the vehicle finally disappeared into the dark, Richard felt his knees nearly give out. He pulled Lauren close, but his mind spun with horror. Christina hadn't just been abandoned by him. She had been hunted. And now that same hunt had shifted to Lauren. If you discovered the love of your life had died protecting a secret tied to your child, would you risk everything to uncover it, or hide the truth to keep her safe? As Richard held Lauren in the shadows of Detroit, he knew the real battle had only begun, and the secrets Christina left behind were about to explode into their lives with devastating force. Richard drove through the empty streets with white knuckles on the steering wheel, the city lights blurring past like accusations he couldn't escape. Lauren sat in the passenger seat, her small body curled against the door. The photograph of Christina clutched to her chest, as though it were the only thing tethering her to safety. Every so often, she glanced at him, eyes wide and uncertain, as if silently asking whether he truly had the strength to keep the promises he had whispered. Richard's mind was a battlefield. The men's words echoed in his head. Christina hadn't died by chance. She had been hunted, and whatever she died protecting now lived inside the frightened girl beside him. Guilt gnawed at him with feral teeth. He had abandoned Christina when she needed him most, and now when their daughter needed clarity, all he had was ignorance. He cursed himself for never listening to the woman who had seen danger long before he had. When they reached his Chicago mansion, the silence in the car was heavier than any negotiation table Richard had ever sat at. Lauren hesitated before stepping out, her voice barely audible. "If they come here too, where will we go?" He froze, the question striking like a hammer. The fortress of wealth he had built suddenly felt like glass walls. Money couldn't shield her from predators who already knew her name. For the first time in decades, he felt powerless, stripped bare of the illusions that billions had bought him. He crouched to her level, forcing his voice steady. "If they come, we'll face them together. They won't take you, Lauren. Not while I'm breathing." But even as he spoke, a darker thought coiled inside him. What if facing them meant putting her in more danger? Later that night, after settling her in a room that seemed too soft, too pristine for the reality she had endured, Richard found himself in his study, surrounded by walls of books and shadows. He unlocked a drawer Christina had once filled with letters he had never read, sealed in yellowing envelopes that had followed him across moves and mergers. His hand shook as he tore one open. The words bled with desperation. "Richard, they are watching me. I don't know who they are, but they want something connected to you, to us. I can't explain in one letter, but please, if you love me, find a way to protect her." He pressed the paper to his face, his chest collapsing under the weight of revelation. Christina had never stopped reaching out. He had chosen silence, and now the child upstairs bore the cost. The conflict inside him split wider. Should he reveal this truth to Lauren, that her mother's death was not an accident, that she was born into a shadow war she never asked for? Or should he keep her innocence intact, even if ignorance meant unpreparedness? Every instinct screamed to protect her from the knowledge, but another part of him knew withholding the truth was the same mistake he had made with Christina. He had ignored her voice until it was gone forever. Could he really silence their daughter now? As dawn seeped through the curtains, Richard found Lauren awake in the kitchen, sipping milk from a glass far too big for her hands. She looked up at him with those piercing blue eyes, weary but unbroken. "Dad," she said softly, as though testing the word again, "why were those men after me? What do they want?" He swallowed hard, every muscle in his body warring between the desire to shield and the need to confess. He opened his mouth to speak, but before the words came, his phone buzzed on the counter. A number he didn't recognize flashed on the screen. Against his better judgment, he answered. A woman's voice, calm and deliberate, sliced through the line. "Mr. Miller, you don't know me, but I knew Christina. If you want to keep your daughter alive, you need to stop asking the wrong questions. Meet me in Boston tomorrow morning. Come alone. Bring Lauren. The truth isn't what you think." The call ended before he could respond, leaving only the hum of silence and Lauren's questioning stare. His chest tightened. Another ghost of Christina's life had emerged, holding answers he both dreaded and needed. But the directive was clear. He had to choose between exposing Lauren to danger on foreign ground or staying home and risking ignorance that could kill her. If you were Richard, would you reveal the full truth to Lauren now or protect her with silence until you knew more? And as he stared at his daughter, Richard realized that his next choice could either save her life or deliver her straight into the hands of the same darkness that had destroyed Christina. Richard barely slept. The woman's voice from the phone echoed through his head like a warning bell he couldn't silence. "If you want to keep your daughter alive, bring her to Boston." The words carried weight, but also danger. Boston was where Christina had once begged him to go, where her final days had unraveled. Now it pulled at him again like a ghost demanding resolution. By morning, his decision hadn't come any easier. Lauren was already awake, seated at the dining table, her hair messy from sleep, her small hands wrapped around the same photograph of her mother she refused to let go of. When Richard entered, she looked up with an expression too old for her age, fragile but resolute. "You're hiding something from me," she said softly. No accusation, just quiet certainty. Richard's chest tightened. He wanted to deny it, to shield her with one more comforting lie, but the truth clawed at him. "Someone called last night," he admitted. "She says she knew your mother. She wants us to meet her. In Boston." Lauren blinked, her lips parting. "Boston? That's where Mom used to say she wanted to take me someday. She said it was a place full of answers." Her voice trembled, but beneath it lay a thread of hope. Richard's heart broke. He had spent years drowning himself in numbers, building empires, while Christina had been whispering stories of hope to their daughter. How much of that hope had he already crushed? He walked closer, lowering himself to meet her gaze. "Lauren, I don't know if this woman is telling the truth. Going there could be dangerous, but if we don't, we may never understand what really happened to your mother, or why those men are hunting you." She looked at him with wide eyes, her voice barely a whisper. What if the answers hurt more than not knowing? The question cut him open. He had asked himself the same thing every night since Christina's death. Would knowing the full truth absolve him, or would it shatter whatever fragile bond he had just begun to build with his daughter? He cupped her small hands in his, steady despite his turmoil. "The truth may hurt, but lies will destroy us. I won't let you live in shadows the way your mother had to. Not if I can stop it." By mid-morning, he was pacing his study, staring at maps, schedules, security contacts he could call. Yet something gnawed at him, the woman's warning to come alone. He had enemies, yes, but so had Christina. If this was a trap, bringing Lauren would mean delivering her straight into their hands. If it wasn't, refusing might mean missing the only chance to finally learn what Christina had died protecting. It was a prison with no clean door out. He pulled open another envelope from the drawer, Christina's handwriting dancing across the page. "Richard, if you ever read this, promise me you'll tell her the truth. She deserves to know who she is, even if it terrifies you." His vision blurred. She had trusted him with that responsibility, and he had failed her once already. Could he risk failing again by staying silent? That evening, Lauren approached him in the hallway, her small frame wrapped in one of the oversized sweaters Mrs. Thompson had given her. "Dad," she whispered, "if Mom wanted us to go there, maybe it means she left something for us to find. Maybe she didn't want me to grow up not knowing. She hesitated, then added, "But if we go, you have to promise you won't let them take me." Her voice cracked on the last words. Richard pulled her into his arms, holding her tighter than he ever had. "They will never take you. I swear on everything I am." Yet as he said it, his mind twisted with the impossible question. What if protecting her meant keeping her from the very truth she longed for? What if loving her required betraying her mother's final wish? That night, he stood at the window, staring out at the Chicago skyline, each light shimmering like a judgment. Behind him, Lauren slept fitfully, the photograph of Christina clutched to her chest. Richard knew what had to be done. The plane to Boston was waiting, and with it, the possibility of either salvation or ruin. Would you risk taking a child into the heart of danger to uncover the truth, or protect her by keeping her in the dark, even if it meant betraying her mother's last wish? And as Richard booked the flight to Boston, he felt the ground shift beneath him, knowing that the city would not just hold answers, it would demand a price he might not be able to pay. The rain was falling in Boston, a steady curtain that blurred the city lights and soaked the streets in silver reflections. Richard held Lauren's hand as they walked toward the address the mysterious woman had given him. His heart hammered with every step, the weight of Christina's letters and the photograph pressing against his chest like relics of a war he had only just realized he was part of. Lauren's grip was tight, but her gaze was steady. There was fear, yes, but also something fiercer, resolve. She wanted answers as much as he did. They arrived at a quiet townhouse on the edge of Beacon Hill, its red brick walls darkened by the rain. Richard knocked, his body tense. The door opened slowly, and a woman in her 40s stood framed in the dim light. Her hair was streaked with gray, her eyes sharp, calculating. "You came," she said. Her voice was the same as on the phone, measured, deliberate. She looked at Lauren with a softness that contrasted the steel in her gaze. "She has her mother's face." Inside, the air smelled of old books and faint lavender. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn Carter. She had been Christina's closest confidant, she said, part of a circle that had helped Christina disappear when the men first came after her. "They wanted what Christina carried," Evelyn explained. "Not money, not power, information, something Richard had once held and didn't even know was missing." Richard frowned, confusion and dread coiling. "What do you mean?" Evelyn placed a folder on the table. Inside were photographs, documents, surveillance notes that made his blood run cold. His own company's files, blueprints, contracts, confidential data, stolen years ago and buried in the shadows. "Christina found out," Evelyn continued. "She realized you were being used, Richard. That's why she left. She wasn't just protecting Lauren from you. She was protecting both of you from them." Richard's chest collapsed under the weight of revelation. All those years, he had cursed Christina for walking away, for not letting him be part of their daughter's life. He had been blind to the truth. She hadn't abandoned him. She had sacrificed everything to keep Lauren out of the line of fire. His arrogance, his refusal to listen, had left her to carry that burden alone until it killed her. Lauren looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "So she died because of them, because of what you didn't see." The words were not a condemnation, but they struck with the force of truth. Richard felt tears rise, his throat burning. He knelt before her, unable to hold back. "Yes," he whispered, "she carried the weight I should have carried, and I will never forgive myself for letting her." He expected anger, rejection. Instead, Lauren placed the photograph of Christina into his hands. "Then don't let me carry it alone now," she said, her voice breaking but steady. In that moment, something inside Richard shifted. He realized redemption was not in erasing the past, but in shouldering the future. Together. He looked at Evelyn. "What do they want now?" Evelyn's expression darkened. The same thing they always wanted. Control. But Christina made sure they could never have it. She hid the final piece of what they were after with Lauren. Richard turned to his daughter, startled. Lauren's brow furrowed. "With me? But I don't have anything." Evelyn shook her head gently. "Not yet. But you will?" Christina made sure of it. The night closed in around them, thunder rolling over Boston. For Richard, the truth landed like a cruel mercy. Christina had not just given him a daughter. She had left behind a legacy, one that would always put Lauren in danger. Protecting her meant more than guarding her body. It meant preparing her to bear a truth that might one day break her. He looked into his daughter's eyes, seeing both the fragility of a child and the strength of the woman she might become. He realized the war Christina had fought was now his to continue, and his redemption would be measured not in what he said, but in how fiercely he fought to keep their daughter free. Lauren leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. For the first time, she whispered not just "Dad," but "my dad," claiming him in a way no words could undo. And in that fragile, beautiful surrender, Richard felt both the wound of all he had lost and the fragile hope of what might still be saved. The rain outside pounded harder, as though the city itself was mourning and blessing the vow he made silently in the dark, that he would not fail her again. What did this ending make you feel about Richard's journey and Christina's sacrifice? Comment 100 if you love this story. Which country are you watching from? Share this video with your friends, and thank you for being part of Hope Stories.